city on the other side of the world. But then she moved to a little country town in the middle of nowhere here in Australia. She likes inks, glues, fabrics, paints, but if she can't get any of those, she'll happily take a pen and a paper. She once broke her wrist roller skating downhill because she forgot how to use the brakes. And she's, apart from the children who are very generous, she's the only one that's laughing in this room because she knows that what I'm doing is taking the mickey out of her, and I'm introducing her the same way we've been introducing each other for over the last couple of 6 weeks or so, doing all of the stints in different schools around southeast Queensland. So, not only is this person an exceptional artist, a great storyteller, and a bit of a decent human being, I've been told as well. She also shares my particular bent for humour, which I find very interesting. Let me introduce you to our MC today. This is Yvonne Mes.
I keep telling my kids it's not about us, it's about Dimity. No, I feel like it's a bit about me anyway. Just deflecting. I know exactly what you're doing. So, welcome everyone to Dimity Powell's book launch of Oswald Messweather. So, yes, my name. Yes, give it a good intro. I will be your MC today, and this morning we will first hear from myself about Dimity, listen to the story, which will be followed by a Q&A. And if you've got any questions that pop up during the reading or during this session, you can ask them later. And then we'll do some activities, make some boats, and of course there will be a chance for Dimity to sign your book. Now, book launches are a celebration of the birth of a new book. A chance to recognize with family and friends that what once was an itty-bitty little idea that has grown into a strong and robust book that we can hold and hug and of course read. Yes. Book launches, now for those of you who need reminding of who Dimity is, here is an introduction of sorts. Here we go. Dimity Powell writes for children because she believes being a kid is one of the coolest things you can be, next to riding dragons and lying under palm trees. Yes. She believes in magic and that ice cream tastes divine in any flavor except maybe rainbow sherbet. Now that was from her website bio, but I would like to share with you a little what I have learned about Dimity. So Dimity and I have covered Squibby conferences together. We share writing groups. She is the fearless leader of the kids book review team, of which I am a rather slack member. And during our time at Gateways, which she just shared a little bit with you, I have discovered that she is also an energetic and engaging presenter. She loves to talk. What?
Oh yeah.
She has traveled all over the world. She is kind and giving, hard-working and smart. And she is passionate about the arts and crafts of writing for children in all its many forms. Now, she's the author of a junior novel, P.S. Who Stole Santa's Mail? She has contributed to many anthologies and magazines. She has written several picture books, The Fix-It Man, At the End of Hollywood Lane, is it there? Is it there? Okay. And Pepper. All beautiful books with a deeply felt emotional core that envelop important messages. But let's look at her latest book, the latest story, the one we are here to celebrate today, Oswald Messweather. So Oswald dislikes mess and disorder. They make his legs jiggle and his palms itch all the time. Counting his crayons helps, but it is exhausting. It takes understanding by a special person for Oswald to find a new direction. Now this is one of those stories that has not been told a lot. It gives children with OCD a voice, a mirror, and a chance to be seen and heard. At the same time, it's a story for every child because it opens a window to a larger world and shows there are many ways to be, which in turn creates empathy and understanding. Now I have two of my wonderful boys with me here today, Felix and Quinton. Quinton has been living with OCD for a few years, And though OCD comes in many different forms, it is his opinion that this is a great book for younger children to get a better understanding of OCD. And for Felix, it has been a fascinating read as he grapples with understanding how his brother might be feeling. So from personal experience, this book was the start of a beautiful and enriching conversation. Right, that's enough for me. Let's give another clap for Dimity.
Well, I will. Some of you may know me, or I have a slight reputation for always getting fantastic people to help me launch my new book, Babies. And this particular occasion, I wasn't going to do that because you forced yourself upon
Yeah, I
me.
did.
Really, you did. Because I thought, you know what, I'm gonna try and do it myself this time. And probably being a touch of a control freak myself, I thought, yeah, I can do that, wing it. So ironically, I haven't prepared anything for this book launch. You'll be very happy to please. So I'm just gonna waffle on as per normal, which will seem normal to you guys from me. But I'm very grateful for this beautiful woman coming along and volunteering to do that, because as she mentioned, OCD is one of those strange mental sort of or health disorders that I feel can affect quite a few of us, and sometimes unbeknownst to us as well. And what usually another reputation that I have is for making issue-based storybooks. It's not a title that I sort of invited. I don't set out to do that, as some of you may know. When I write a book, it's really just listening to the character's story and telling the story that yells the most loudly to be written first. That's my main motivation for writing books. With Oswald, it was a little bit different. Normally, I like to hear the character's story before I tell it. With Oswald, I was thinking about the character before his story came into play, and in particular his name, and you'll see more about his name when I read the story to you in a minute. And it was all these different reflections about the acronyms that we have for neurodiversity conditions and things like that that got me thinking, I don't see these kind of books in schools, in mainstream sort of picture books, so much as some of the other conditions that children are experiencing in the classroom. So I thought, how interesting for this little character to be going through those kind of things. And when we get to Q&A, I'll probably elaborate a little bit more about the OCD condition. We won't give it all away. But let's give it all away in a reading. Who wants to listen to the book? Yes, oh, me, I like the me's. Okay, so this is Oswald Messweather, written by me, published by Wombat Books, and illustrated by Siobhan McVey, who couldn't be here today. I think she's in Melbourne, but she did a fantastic job. So this is Oswald Messweather. Oswald Constantine Dorian Messweather hated his name more than Brussels sprouts. It was clumsy and confusing and messy. Very, very messy. Like his mum in the mornings and his dad's tool shed. Or the bear pit. Who has a brother or sister who has a bear pit? Yes, I have a daughter who has a bear pit. That's open for discussion. Just thinking about messy things made Oswald's palms itch and his legs jiggle. His head would fill with a tangle of swirling doubts that he knew were untrue but couldn't undo. But when Oswald counted his crayons, the messiness was a bit less messy. He counted them before breakfast, he counted them when his dad yelled for help, and he counted them whenever he went near the bear pit. Because look how messy that is. Oh.
Like my room.
Like whose room?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a confession.
And like
Oswald would line up his crayons, twist them this way and that, and wipe them clean. Then he would count. 1, 2, 3. Counting his crayons was as important as breathing, but much, much more tiring. before messy thoughts took over and awful things could happen, Oswald always rushed to count his crowns. But worries were never far away, and messes lurked everywhere, especially at school. You all know how messy you are at school, right? You've all seen yourselves eat lunch, haven't you? Oh, yes. One morning, Miss Mop asked the class to get into groups for a floating science experiment. Kai, Tani and Flynn gathered around Oswald. His palms began to itch and his legs began to jiggle. What if his thoughts tangled into knots? What if the eggs exploded, or the boat sunk, or Flynn ate all the oranges? Oswald tried to keep his itches and jiggles out of the way, but he couldn't. So he lined up his crayons. He twisted them this way and that, and wiped them clean. Then he began to count. 1, 2... Oswald, Miss Mop interrupted. I think we need to record the results. They need to be neat and precise and colourful. Oswald paused and then reached for his crayons. He sketched and ruled and coloured and drew, using his crayons to record everything, even the messy bits. Line by line, Oswald's head filled with colour and designs until there was less and less room for tangled thoughts. It felt so good, he hardly thought about jiggling or counting or the mess his classmates might be making. Oswald's diagrams were neat and precise and very, very colourful. He even coloured in a waterproof boat for Flynn that refused to sink. Hold your boat up. Wow. There's one we made earlier. Miss Mop was so impressed, she took a photo for the classroom wall. Oswald tucked his crayons into his school bag, where they stayed at playtime and during show and tell. By the end of the day, Miss Mop's hair had erupted everywhere, but Oswald's crayons stayed in his bag. And even though tiny tangled thoughts still snuck into his head now and then, Oswald felt he didn't need his crayons quite so much anymore. Oh, except to draw. That night, Oswald tiptoed past the bear pit. He unpacked his crayons, he lined them up and twisted them this way and that. And then he wiped them clean. Then Oswald Messweather asked the sea. That's the end of that. We're okay. We're not aging authors at all.
No.
You're aging.
Oh,
47. 47, yeah, 47.
We love inviting children to these events. But
these
they
kids.
can
Yes.
Okay.
Whose children are they? Okay,
Not kids.
hang on. We need some help for Q&A.
Oh, do we?
Look who we have here!
Oh, so
This
this is very interesting. So we can ask Dimity questions
for us.
through Oswald, so that she can take a little bit of distance from the deep emotional stories
Okay.
we're going to hear
All right, so-
this morning.
We got unhappy Oswald. Are you happy about answering questions? Oh, look at his eyes.
He's a bit worried.
Hang
I
on.
would be too.
Oswald.
Oswald,
Yeah, we'll
I
be good.
honestly,
We'll
I'll be very gentle.
Okay,
I've
be
got a
gentle.
couple of questions only, but I do invite you later to ask any of your questions yourself. So, Oswald Messweather, Miss Dimity, or
Yes.
Oswald, sorry.
Yes.
That's a pretty unique and specific name, as well as the title, of course. Can you tell us a little about how that name came to be?
Yes. Well, actually, it was me sort of, as I said, musing and mulling over all the different acronyms that could happen. And for some reason, the name Oswald just popped into my head. Once I had the O word and the O name, the rest seemed to follow. And if any of you can be bothered, some of the teachers and librarians here too might want to go online. And if you do investigate, I love researching. Authors love researching stuff, even for just picture books and things. And each one of his names has a certain meaning, which can mean strength and purity and hope. And I wanted these things to also represent Oswald, the character, not just his story. So can any of the children tell me, or big kids, probably the children will do better than the big kids, what do you think is the initials of his name? If you can remember his full name, what do they stand for?
OCD?
Yes.
OCM, actually.
Well, OCM. Oh, well, yes, OCM. But somebody has interpreted Messweather, and this is something I wanted to include because, of course, it was the mess that was the trigger to Oswald's sort of compulsive behaviours. And
So his full name is
Oswald Constantine Dorian Messweather. And it's been interpreted that Messweather is the way that Oswald is trying to weather the storms of anxiety and fears that are welling up with him that he's having to contend with when those messes present themselves. So I thought that was a nice little tie-in. So yes, names really do matter when we're naming our characters.
Yes. Yep. Now, a little bit of further insight into how the story evolved from the first steps into the fully realised story.
Yes. Again, sometimes I'm challenged by even people here in the audience, especially teachers and librarians, and they say, we think we need more books about such and such. And that's where some of my book ideas have come from. Again, this particular idea did not originate. The genesis for it just crept into my head one day when I was playing with all those names and realizing, maybe with reflection, that we all have tendencies to fear something, and fears can, as most of you know, I'm a great advocate for facing fears as well, but fears can spark all sorts of things, behaviours and even stories. And in me, I realised that maybe I have a touch of OCD too, and I don't mean to use that like as an adjective or because it's not, but I reflected on the way that I behave sometimes and the thoughts that go through my mind, and then the behaviours that I have to try and deflect those fears and anxieties of things going wrong. If I do something like this, maybe this occurrence won't happen. And I realised that maybe young kids have this, because I felt that I had this from quite young as well. And I realised later on in life, when you cannot have those anxieties, it's quite liberating. When you're worried and obsessing about fears and anxieties all the time, it's exhausting. For me, I was exhausted. And when they were absent from my life, I realized how free it was. So I got to thinking, how does a young child cope with things like that? And although I wasn't surprised to find out, I was shocked to learn that children as young as 6 can suffer from conditions like OCD, which I found quite confronting and upsetting in a way as well, because, you know, to feel that exhausted and to feel that overwhelmed all the time, I felt must be really significant for them. That's where the story came about.
Wow.
And I started building on that.
So did you use any experts in the field? Did you do any research in
Oh yes,
intricacies of OCD? Or?
Yeah, apart from my own sort of feelings and reactions from it, of course when you're writing a book like this, I always like to refer to psychologists, so it is all pretty well founded, and we go backwards and forwards quite a lot, because we need to make sure that we're getting it right. So there is a lot of consultation involved when we're going through the editing stage to make sure that the outcomes and the final conclusions do actually ring true. Do I know everything about this condition? No, absolutely not. And I don't think we can all know 100% what it feels like to be in someone else's shoes. Are books like this the solution and the fix to these conditions? Of course they're not. But I hope what they do is create connections. And I know we've already made some fantastic connections. If I go on about them too much, I'll get quite emotional. The way the children have reacted and the things that they grab from Oswald's story have touched me beyond words. And you know, your words, you know, Talia, I can't even speak anymore. Yeah, her words have been like a big warm hug to me. And that for an author is very gratifying, because we know that we're now making that connection. This is what picture books do. This is what stories do. They make that connection with readers, with other human beings, so that perhaps we can go away and start discussions about that character's story, what's happening to them, how they're feeling, and how it relates to them. So that's where that came from. That's the research, yeah.
That's beautiful. Now, when we were reading your book, and it brought up a lot of discussion as well, we talked about the teacher in the book. She's very understanding and very empowering, and us as a family have encountered the opposite a little bit in schools. Understanding.
No reflection on the teachers here.
No, it is here.
Yeah, I quite like Miss Mop too, and it was funny. I quite like her for her hair. It reminds me of a certain person's hair. And I'll have to say, there was absolutely no consultation between myself and the illustrator when she was doing this, which a lot of people find peculiar. They just automatically pick up on sort of the nuances from our stories, from the words, and they create their own picture story from that. But what I love about Miss Mop is, you're right, she gives agency to Oswald. And Talia actually put it in a way, pardon me if I misquote you, but she said her favourite part was when the teacher sort of gave him a reason to shine, and he kept shining for the rest of the day, because she gave him some hope and she gave him some purpose, that just because he is obsessing, just because he's a little bit different and distant from the others, doesn't make him any stranger. We just have to employ his differences with purpose, and that's what she did. So that's beautiful.
Yeah. So was there anyone you had in mind have you had any such people in your life?
Well, I did and I didn't. I had an English teacher actually that I still remember to this day. She was a little bit of a messy dresser as well. Her name was Mrs. Jones, and I still remember her because she treated my messy writing and my messy story ideas with the same sort of respect. And she wasn't, she wasn't judgmental, she wasn't overtly encouraging, but she was always there as a support. And I think that's important for kids too, and from teachers and librarians, because kids remember them. I still remember her to this day. So she made a significant impact on the way, not that I wrote stories, but the way I felt about myself for writing stories. So yeah.
So now there are two creators in this book.
Yes.
In just on, is it Siobhan?
Siobhan, yes.
McVey.
Yeah.
Your name's Yvonne.
Her name is Siobhan.
It's
right.
Irish.
They're very similar.
That's right, you are correct. Now, and as you say, usually there is not a lot of backwards and forth between author and illustrator. Was that the case with you?
Yes, I didn't actually. I saw some of the roughs for Little Oswald right at the beginning, and in fact, one of the first roughs that I saw, which was interesting, was this Brussels sprouts one, and it was all in black and white. And I thought that's very, everything that Siobhan sort of tried to imbue in Oswald here, his neat haircut. He's not wearing a sloppy t-shirt, he's got every hair in place. And it's very different from some of the other illustrations that appear in my story by different illustrators, which I felt was nice. It's sort of stylized, but what Siobhan is going, what Siobhan has tried to do, and this is something we did share, can you see all of the tangled thoughts in Oswald were coming out of his mind? And to me that was very significant, because some days that's exactly what we must all feel like. I certainly do, when there's just so much going on up there that it's swirling around and it gets in knots just like my hair. And I don't know if you've ever had long hair, but that's almost impossible to get a knot out sometimes unless you exercise a little bit of time and patience. So by her doing this, she actually, I think, softened some of the text, because some of my text can be a bit abstract and the words can be metaphorical, and that's deliberate so that everybody can read their own impressions into it. But again, when she did this page here, we didn't know whether to add more to it or add less, but it's just that swirling rainbow of colours, a bit like our rainbow boats there, and that exemplifies his freedom and his sense of letting go and being truly using his creativity to funnel his compulsions rather than in a negative way. It's more positive. And I think we, as you know, as an artist, we use the colours to do that, to release emotion, show emotion. So yeah, but no consultation. She did that on her own.
Yeah, and she did an amazing job. And I really love that page you showed before, where he's sort of in that blue swell.
Yes.
He's sort of clinging onto his little boat.
Yes.
I thought
Some
she
people
did that
ask
really
me what
well.
my favourite spread is, and it's very weird. It's actually this
that's my
wordless
favourite
spread.
too.
It's my favourite, and it's like nothing. It's two colours almost, but it says so much, doesn't it? It's the torrent of emotion in there.
Now Quentin had a question. He actually noticed that when we were reading the book at home, he goes, OCD, the whole word, they're not in there except for the name, I guess.
Yes. So what's the question?
So the question is, why is that?
Well, I think that's deliberate as well, because I didn't want to be too, with a picture book, you don't want to be too overt with it. Not every person who picks this up will know what OCD is or experienced it before, or even maybe had a child with it. But you can almost guarantee that there's someone next to you who does. So I need to make this sort of more globally acceptable, if you like. So there's a real reason why we don't put OCD on every page. But Ozzie's actions, I call him Ozzie because that's my pet name for him, Ozzie's actions by always lining up his crayons, always counting them, always suffering sort of the exhaustion that involves, that represents his actual condition more than if I just put OCD on every page.
And as Quentin had been telling me, everybody with OCD is different. So you could never put everybody in there. So
Absolutely.
by leaving it so open-ended, you've made it more approachable for everybody.
Something interesting. That book, he only has one main thing with the OCD. I feel most people with OCD, they kind of connect to the same thing in the end, but usually like lots of different things.
Yeah, it's all, everybody's different, and everybody with OCD is different. You're right. Now I'm going to invite anybody here to, if you have any questions for Dimity about anything. I mean, what's a favourite colour? What's a favourite flavour ice cream?
Green. Oh, we covered this.
How long does it take to write the book?
Oh,
Anybody?
3 years.
Yes.
How long does it take to write the book?
good question. Green, I'm glad you asked it. Okay. This particular book, would you believe it or not, took me 8 hours to write. Yes, I know. I tell people 4 years normally. 8 hours because I was on a flight. Remember back in the good old days when we could fly? And I was on a flight from here to Singapore to visit my sister. 8-hour flight. And while everybody else was asleep because it was a Scoot airline, there's nothing else to do, I curled up and I thought, finally I've got time to write a book. And I was, as I said, I've been sort of percolating the idea of his name for a little while, and I wrote the entire script, start to finish, on that 8-hour flight. And when I got off, I felt like, hello, look what I've done. They're going, hi, welcome to Singapore. I know, I've got to go home and finish this book. So 8 hours. That was in 2017.
What the?
Yes. So when I came back home, I had to then, of course, refine it. I had to find a publisher for it, and that takes a little bit longer. Then, of course, we had to illustrate it. Then, of course, we had COVID, so that was another year. So it's been about 4 years in the process. I want to show you one little thing because this is interesting. I know some of you might find this interesting. On that 8-hour flight, when I first wrote the draft of it, it was actually called Ozzie and the Dinky Doos. And I knew that I had to have some little thing that Ozzie was attached to that was the catalyst, if you like, for his compulsive behaviour. And these are tiny tots. Again, we do a lot of research, so I had to research a lot of stuff. I had to make sure I wasn't using copyright and patented names. These were called tiny tots. I changed mine to Dinky Doos. Then we went to Pocket Pals. And then we thought, how can this become more creative? Hence, we came up with the crayons. So eventually, initially, it was all about the toys and things like that were his actual pocket pals, his companions. But I think the crayons actually worked better in the end because they were as I said, the outlet for his creativity. So yeah, that's how that all originated.
Well, thanks so much for giving a good insight into your process and how the book came to be. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we go on to our book signing?
Just buy the book.
Just buy the book.
No,
So
no.
you're here. Do not leave
No.
without a copy.
What I
Oh,
did
hang
want
on.
to-
We've got
Oh,
something there.
Dad's got a
Just
question.
another question,
Oh,
Dimity.
okay.
When you were writing the book,
Yes.
did you often think of your father?
Yes.
If indeed you used him as your inspiration,
Was he the role model?
No, I didn't want to labour too much on this, but if any of you read books cover to cover as I do, you'll notice that the dedication is for Dad, who taught me details matter and how to make paper boats, which is very apt not only for my career now as an author, because I do harp on about, I think, details in our writing, as some of the authors out there know, really do matter. But also, and I did want to dedicate it to Dad, especially because, you know, we can get fanatical about getting tied up on an idea or tied up on the details. And sometimes it's good just to release that and go and flow with, you know, no details and no restrictions and no constraints. So there was a mixed sort of, you know, thing for that. But the boats do reflect, as you can see down on the activities table, which we can launch into. Get it launched in a minute. Dad was actually responsible when I was your age, when I was little Sophia's age here, making these little sampan boats, and I used to colour them in, believe it or not, in crayon, so they'd be waterproof and then they would float, and that's what I remembered. So when I wasn't even conscious of that when I was writing about the science experiment, but I realised that that's the exact thing that, you know, connected Dad and everyone with the idea and the boats. So yes, good question.
Well done, Dad.
We didn't rehearse that at all.
He
I
wants
wasn't
10%
too
of all
much
the
referring-
sales.
Sorry.
I wasn't referring to the boat, rather to the OCD.
Yeah, no, I got it. I got it.
Trying to pull back from that.
Not expose you. Yeah.
Not exposed. And the other thing was, the funny thing, and this sounds a little bit crass, but I did say to Dad a year and a half ago, they've delayed the publication. Can you just hang on and not die or anything? Because it's a very special book. It's dedicated to you. Can you hang on another year? And that's true. And you've done very well, thanks. So we made it because I just couldn't stand any more delays.
So wonderful of you to just
true.
live on. Yes. No, just a minute. Okay.
So yes, we can do, that brings us to the activities.
Yes.
There are activities, you can make the special little boats, or we've got a simplified version as well. There's colouring in sheets, and there's one or two little edible crayons. Don't eat the wax ones. The ones in the wrappers that look like chocolates, you can have those for a bit of bite.
So basically the message is do not leave before you have made a boat, bought a book and had it signed. So thank you all for coming, and give Dimity We're done.
I'm just going to say thank you very much for doing that. We can't hug, we can't do anything, but your words and your just being here is like a big warm hug to me. And I know you like chocolate, so you get yours. They're just for you all to share.
All right, mingle and
Thank you, everybody.